Why, hello there! Welcome to Watchbox and thank you for logging on. As you can see in my new debonair lair, watches tonight vastly upgraded and chock-a-block with action. I gotta be honest, we didn't even think this thing was gonna go on the air. We're still struggling with the YouTube interface on the back end. So welcome the hell to my new studio, guys. I'm your host, Tim Masso, and this evening we're discussing why cars and watches are never directly comparable, and infamous instances when brands cheapened their watches, often on the sly. As ever, I want to call out my live chat because it seems the interface is actually working. This whole thing almost didn't happen. Andrew is the hero of the night right over there. Big shout out to Andrew. Edward Ledden from Sweden, big shout out to you. Blue Shirt Buddha, Watches and Whiskey. Matthew P. from Germany. Robert Dixon from Scotland. We got Prakesh Chi joining in, Patrick Suze, we got Squiggly, we've got Thomas Burnett, Love Watches USA, Sergeant 0331 from California, Turkischer Meister from Turkey, Adam Crossfire, welcome in the box, Jenks 72, Richard Combs from South Florida, Birkin, nice t-shirt, yep, this is from my friend Ariel, he gave it to me for free. He may have had ulterior motives in promoting his apparel, but I got a free shirt out of it, so it's all square. And then we've got Smoko from New York City joining in. As you can see, we've got friends from the UK. We've got Marco B joining in from Harrogate. And we've got Wrist Cartography, evening Tim, evening Wrist, and 121 Click Bezel. Guys, sound off in the chat box. And while you do, here's our lobby topic of the night. It's going to be the topic where you guys file in. Basically, why watches and cars are often linked in the enthusiast mind, but not directly comparable. And there are many reasons. But I think the single greatest reason is longevity. At the end of the day, it is the exceptional car that exceeds the estimated service life of 10 to 20 years, even 20 years. For a car, even with modern manufacturing standards and materials, is really getting up there. Ask yourself, no matter where you live in the world, how many pre-1980 cars do you see on the road? Heck, how many pre-1990 cars do you see on the road? And have you ever seen a functional 1995 Chrysler in the last 15 years? I didn't think so, and there's a reason for that, and it's Chrysler transmissions. My point here is that watches always have a service life that exceeds any car. We're talking the life of the owner and beyond. 1, 2, 300 years. Go to the Patek Philippe Museum in Geneva. You'll see 500-year-old watches that are still 100% functional, as well as complicated clocks that still predict the vernal equinox. Incredible things. And this is the number one reason that watches are different than cars. They don't depreciate to nothing. At the end of the day, the watch is still useful as a watch, provided it's serviced. Whereas a car, even if you perform all the maintenance in the book, eventually degrades to its scrap value, and thus it's difficult to make direct comparisons. Watches are all about longevity, and because of that notion of longevity and permanence, because they are more, I would say, personal and physical and immediate, people don't want to rent them, and people don't want to lease them. It flies in the face of the notion of permanence. I've talked in the past about the failure of watch renting and watch leasing schemes. Even 11 James, which was considered to be the disruptor in the industry, even they folded. So at the end of the day, people want permanence from their watch, and that's what they get. And while we all envision permanence in our cars, the reality is it is the rare 1957 Chevy that makes it to the year 2020, and that's pretty much true of all generations of automobile. I'll also mention the pre-owned market. Watchbox is a specialist in pre-owned, and there is a huge pre-owned car market, but the two things are very different, and here's the main reason. The pre-owned auto market, as, shall we say, embodied by the certified pre-owned vehicle, it depends on something that we don't have in the watch world, which is the lease. Mercedes-Benz, Lexus, BMW, Audi, Cadillac, Lincoln. They don't want to fight with you over the value of the car you're turning in. The car is coming back from a lease and they already know what the car is worth, which is why they can so seamlessly transition from leased cars to certified pre-owned cars. You really don't need an intricate knowledge of the market. All you need is residuals in print, in ink, locked in ahead of time. You already know what the car is going to be worth when it comes back. In the watch world, it never works that way. There are no watch leases, there are no agreed residuals, and the brands themselves struggle to embrace pre-owned. Consider pre-owned cars everywhere. You can buy a certified pre-owned Hyundai or Kia. Can you buy a certified pre-owned Patek Philippe? No. I heard from a high-level brand executive a few years back who loved the idea of certified pre-owned, but said at the end of the day, we've dug ourselves a hole and created a trap into which we've stepped, which is that we've been telling people for years that a watch is an investment and suggested at the point of sale, even with gold dress watches, that this would be worth more down the line. How do you then offer the person 45 cents on the dollar for that watch when it comes back in? It's impossible. You'd rather he just goes and sells it to a pre-owned vendor and comes back and pays retail for your watch. At the very least, you won't have to give him the bad news. And that's why watches and cars are so different. Permanence, longevity, and yeah, the pre-owned market. Big reasons. Okay, jumping into the box right here, we've got De Madden from Hamburg, Wrist Cartography from London, Eddie Landsberg coming to us from Harvard, his new school and his new home. Let's take a look at some of your watches in my box. Wrist shots number 1. McCalby shoots his Omega Speedmaster, ironically, you can see in the background, without speed, for safety's sake on the road. We've got Mark G and his Omega Seamaster, and they're in the spirit of the season, picking pumpkins in New Jersey. It's a good look. Blaine T and his Tudor Black Bay Blue go for a ride in his Genesis G70 out in California. And Edward B runs his pre-surgery prep with his Rolex Milgauss. You can see that Z blue dial shining right through the latex before, of course, giving it a rest during the procedure itself. Guys, send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com. Let's see who's in the box right now. We got friends from all over the place. We've got Renside from Parts Unknown. Let me see if I can bring back the live chat here. We've got Brian S. checking in. We've got Kunik joining in from Berlin. We've got the Ethical Hedonist joining in. Hey guys, hey Ethical Hedonist. And we've got Keystar G60 asking, Tim, what became of your Swatch System 51? I still have it. I still wear it. I guess when I'm on camera, I tend to stay in character, which means I'm generally wearing one of my favorite tees, my glasses, and my Zin, at least until the weather changes and I take to long sleeves and long pants. We've got Matt M. joining in from Mackinac, Illinois, and we've got Marceau joining in from New Orleans. All right, guys, Eric Bell joining in from Lac Le Monde. Let's talk about whether you guys are car enthusiasts and what your favorite watch and car co-branded watches were. I gotta be honest, the best ever, to me, were the Jaeger LeCoultre Amvox series. The Amvox 1 was an alarm. It was a timid first step. This is familiar territory for JLC, an alarm watch. But the Amvox 2 was a pusherless vertical trigger chronograph unlike anything before or after. It's still singular today. The Amvox 3, like the entire Amvox line, wasn't a modification of an existing watch. It was an entirely new model line to celebrate the 1920s through 1990s relationship between Jaeger Instruments and Aston Martin road cars. And the Amvox 3 Tourbillon GMT was a wonderful, rich, all-time high mark for that line, as there was never a more complicated or more expensive Amvox model. There was no Amvox 4, there was no Amvox 6 for reasons that have to do with Eastern superstitions, but there was an Amvox 5 World Time Chrono. Fascinating, but not as innovative as the two. And they sent it off with the Amvox 7. Again, the vertical trigger pusherless chrono, but now with quick release lugs and a power reserve added from the Extreme Lab 2. So that's my summary of my favorites all time. I can see right here Miroslav is saying, Gerard Perregaux, Ferrari's Scuderia collaboration was absolutely perfect. We've got Tim S. saying Breitling for Bentley Le Mans. That's a good nomination. Edward Ledden is saying, yes, the Amvox 2 is the best car-branded chronograph ever made. And the other great thing about the Amvox is the branding was subtle. It was never overt. It was never in your face. We've got Eric Nielsen right here saying, I have several Instagram posts of my Black Bay 58 Tudor and my Genesis sedan. You know I like them. And right here, that's my standard placeholder. I see we have Jabo Surf in the box, and we've got Amit Gupta joining in. All right, guys, let's take a look at some more of your wrist shots. Cue them up, Andrew. Emil G. of Cape Town, South Africa, luxuriates by the pool with the Jaeger LeCoultre Master Ultra-Thin Perpetual Calendar in steel. That one is a killer. James W. in a first generation Alongo Unzona 1815 flyback chronograph, hard at work. Nice ink too. Alec T. of Hong Kong braves the bus commute with his Watchbox bought IWC Tribute to Mark 11. Thank you so much for trusting us, and thanks for trusting Zoe out in our Hong Kong office, guy. Thank you so much, Alec. Michael M. of San Diego and Oreo the dog enjoy Southern California with his Omega Seamaster Aqua Terra. Okay, cutting corners. This is the topic du jour. A lot of times, cutting the chicane much? A lot of times, watch brands will decontent their watches, they will pinch pennies, they will save their franc, and they will do it in ways that are not immediately apparent. Well, I'm lifting the lid on this particular practice, and I'm calling out specific instances when brands, including watch nerd brands and high horology brands, cut the cost of making their watches with little notice given. I will say that Rolex, for once, you have the night off on YouTube because you're not subject to this discussion. Rolex, since the 2000s, has mostly added content, increased the integrity of their bracelets, their clasps, their end links, their bezels, their cases, their movements. There's been very little decontenting. I miss the old hand-laid bevels, but that's readily apparent and upfront. I'm mostly talking about things on the sly, which is why Audemars Piguet, I need to call you out for changes you've made 2 times in the last 8 years to your brand icon, the immortal jumbo, the Royal Oak 15202. 2 ways this watch has changed in order to pair the pennies, or I suppose Swiss franc, because they are, after all, in Switzerland. First, this downgrade is easy to place, both in time and in shape. In 2012, that was the year the Royal Oak line was redesigned across the board. For example, we got the first ever monotone date disc in the jumbo, so blue on blue, black on black, silver on silver. It was also the first year of the 41mm Royal Oaks, and it was the year that the gorgeous old rotor in the jumbo went away. Now take a good look at that. You can see that that is hand skeletonized, hand beveled internally, and if you look between the A and the P, right next to Audemars Piguet on the rotor, you can see that they have triple external points. That's the opposite of an inward angle, and it's just as difficult to achieve. This was artisanal, low volume, excruciating to execute, and truly special in appearance. The problem is that the same prior rotor was often, and often without any additional charge, customized with engraving on top of the skeletonization, meaning you could actually have that rotor personalized in addition to all of the fine finish we just saw, which made it a precipitous fall from grace when the new rotor arrived on caliber 2121 in 2012. It is clearly simplified and tailored for mechanized and mass production. Now, the 15202 still isn't mass produced, and the movement still is finished to a higher standard than the 15500, but this was a step back. This was a step toward higher volume. This was a step away from beauty and rarity. It made the watch a little bit less soulful. And we know that AP can do far better because just in the last year, the rotor for the code 1159 perpetual calendar, if you get close right there, you can see there is a huge array of sharp internal angles inside that rotor. While not as poetic as the old 15202, it still is excruciating, intricate, special, low volume, and slow to produce. But again, that's a watch that retails for over $70,000, and the jumbo is less than half that. I would love to see that rotor on the 15202. Now, the second diminishment of the jumbo occurred in what I believe to be the 2017 model year, and this one was, like I said, on the sly, covert. This was Black Ops. What happened? Well, it's cheapening of the watch that you could easily miss. But Gerald Genta's original monoblock 5402 Royal Oak had a separate bezel, but the case and the case back were all of one piece. And long term, through the 80s, the 90s, and well, the 2000s right up until 2017, the case back was still one with the case. Oh sure, there was an aperture for a sapphire, but it's important to remember that that surround encompassing and enclosing the movement was still one with the case. There was no seam. It was difficult to create and slow to build. Like the old rotor, it was a little bit more expensive and time consuming, and it was beautiful for that. I would also say it's important to remember that whereas Patek Philippe abandoned the monoblock case of the Nautilus with the 2006 5711, 5980 and their ilk, AP long stuck with both the original movement and the original monoblock case from the original 1972 Royal Oak, which made the Jumbo more of a living continuation of the original than a modernized version of the original, which is what the Patek Nautilus became. So this watch was very close to the original 5402, with the exception of a display case back, better dial quality, and a higher grade bracelet and clasp. Patek, I should say, discarded the monoblock case in 2006 across the board, and I used to call out AP and give them credit for not doing that until I discovered a three-piece 15202 case, in which the case back had a little gap between the case and the case back structure, and inside that you could see that there was a seal. Just like there's a seal on the bezel side, there was a seal on the reverse side. And this was truly unfortunate, again, because it was a cheapening and a stealthy one, as nothing was ever announced, nor did Audemars Piguet ever try to justify on a substantive basis why this was done. And they can't, because we know the reason. But I think this happened in the 2017 model year, which should correspond roughly to the mid-J serial numbers. So this is all collector guidance. If you look at the J serial numbers, check to see if it's the monoblock case or a three-piece case. Early J's might still be the monoblock, but the later ones are almost definitely the three-piece case. And I'm telling you this because a lot of folks in the watch collector fraternity are traditionalists. I know I would want the older one. Prices, however, are strong across the board. They sell for the same amount of money pre-owned, and the market doesn't seem to distinguish between the three-piece case or the monoblock, mostly because the Royal Oak has such a designer factor to it. A lot of the people who are buying are into it because it is a piece of, well, I would say it's a totem of status. It's a mark of conspicuous consumption. It's also beautifully made, but when that's maybe a tertiary priority at best, again, the market's going to continue treating these the same, and prices haven't suffered. But you know, and I know, it's not the same. Now, jumping into the box right here, let's see how many viewers we have. Okay, this interface is still holding up, and I regret that we almost didn't make this happen. Again, if you're just joining in, Andrew's the hero over there in the corner. He overcame our tech problems. We have Smoko asking, are the Blancpain caliber 1315 and 1151 really finished by hand? Can machines do the rounded anglage? At this point, they almost never do. When you see really rounded mirrored anglage, something like an 1151 or a 1315 on a Blancpain or a BVL 138 on a Bulgari, in general what happens is machines are used to start the beveling, and then the finish, to get it rounded and mirrored without file marks, that's often finished off by hand. But from start to finish entirely by hand, that's quite rare. That's the likes of Grubel Forsey, that's the likes of Philippe Dufour, maybe Romain Gauthier, but that's exceptional. When you see that mirrored rounded anglage, it's almost always finished by hand, even if it isn't started that way. And right here, we have Mark S. saying, the loss of the Audemars Piguet monoblock case bothers me. Me too, because I was in the middle of making a video about one of those, and I was talking about the monoblock construction when I looked at it and realized it didn't seem to add up. There was some sort of gap. I got closer and I saw, unfortunately, AP is not as traditional as the folks in this chat box. So let's talk about Officine Panerai, for which there is often no bottom. As you can see, there is no bottom to that logo because the light goes right through it. My bad. I'll also say this, I genuinely like Panerai, and my first term of my first year of college back in 2002, I had a PAM 40 on the desktop of my old desktop Dell computer. So I like the brand, and historically I do have an affection for it, even if it's not really my style as a mature collector. But here's the thing, the long-term Paneristi have received periodic tributes, the PAM 195, the PAM 360, the PAM 532. Somewhere mixed in, I think some wrong turns have been taken and some corners have been cut. And we're entering the Hall of Fame now for cost cutting, and you know this watch already, but there's the Panerai PAM 318. Also known as the Brooklyn Bridge, which is ironic because here in the United States we have this expression to sell someone the Brooklyn Bridge, which is basically to con them or fool them. And this watch for the New York boutique had an engraving of the Brooklyn Bridge on its caseback. And it's a good thing that was a solid caseback, because while this kind of Panerai isn't known for its movement finish, nevertheless, The COSC certified 6497 base Panerai OP2 manual wind movement should look roughly like this. That is not an unfinished basic 6497. It's chronometer grade. It's customized, both bridges and waves and regulator for Panerai. It has a longer power reserve. It has a higher beat rate. In contrast, here's the non-COSC, non-customized, bare base grade 6497 that Panerai calls the caliber OP29. And this is the movement in the PAM 318. Again, I talk about this being done covertly and on the sly. There was no price cut. There was no notice that this watch was all about the dial and the case back, and that inside it would be somewhat short of expectations. No warning was given that this was basically half a watch on your wrist. And while the movement is reliable and tough, it's not beautiful or accurate. And again, this is an egregious act of bad faith because no discounts were proposed, nor quality disclosed for this solid case-back watch. It is the infamous PAM 318 that has almost become a collector piece on that basis alone. But in the interests of disclosure, can we go full screen here? When I shot a video of this watch, I had to be absolutely clear, right down to the title, that this is a controversial timepiece, and it is an object of much dispute. Full disclosure, the infamous PAM 318. Now, I talked a little bit about the Paneristi, the enthusiasts of Panerai, and how I was actually among their ranks in the early days with the 195, the 360, the 532, all effectively brand recognition that they had an unconventional and particularly enthusiastic fan base. Where I think they violated that good faith was in the PAM 634 of 2015. 15 years of the Paneristi website. This was a watch that in many regards represents cost-cutting taken to the extreme, as 500 pieces were made to ensure everyone got one. However, the loss of the screwed-in caseback, the replacement of screws and bars for the strap with spring bars, the use of a non-chronometer movement. True, it's a two-hand dial, and those generally don't have the chronometer movements, but it would have meant something given the rest of the watch if they'd at least gone with a Marina dial and put in a COSC movement. Add that somewhat cloying Fotina, and this was a watch that in a lot of regards disappointed people because, well, it looked like a Panerai Luminor. Between the quality of the movement, the spring bars, and the snap caseback, a lot of folks felt that Panerai was letting down its most loyal collectors at exactly the time entering the watch recession of 2015 when the company could not afford to lose their allegiance. So that was a bit of an infamous case. Still a fun watch to own, but there's a reason that previous Paneristi special editions are generally better regarded and higher priced by the market. Let's jump into the chat box and see what you guys are saying. Amit Gupta is asking, did the monoblock AP have greater water resistance than 50 meters? No, the water resistance hasn't changed, and in fact, AP doesn't distinguish between its screw-down crown 15500 and its push-down crown 15202 with water resistance. They're both rated at 50. I wouldn't swim with the push-down crown 50. So substantively, what changed was how the case was made, which is a sort of craft factor because it also changed how the case was finished. It's a lot easier to finish the case back when you can finish it as a separate piece and then stick it on than it is to finish it on the case when the case back and the back side of the bezel have very different finishes. I'll also mention right here, we have, let me just bring back my live chat here. We have Barrel and Blue saying, I still love my PAM 233, but I totally agree about your Panerai analysis. Edward Ledden of Sweden asking, Tim, who is your favorite F1 driver of all time? I like a lovable loser. So I'm going to say either David Coulthard or I don't know, maybe David Brabham. Again, there was a guy who came from the famous family of racing Brabhams. His father a knight and a three-time champion. His brother Jeff conquered every summit in sports car racing. And David arguably only hit his stride as an older guy in sports cars during the 2000s and 2010s. And history might remember him more as a car constructor than a driver. His spell in F1 was brief, but he took on the role of team leader when his teammate died on track. And He had to deal with a car that was never right on a team that was never properly financed. I thought his potential was untapped. He always seemed like a level-headed, fun, fan-oriented guy and a hell of a driver on the circuit. So I'd say my favorite F1 driver of all time is David Brabham. Not known for driving in F1, but an awesome driver overall and a good guy. Let's see. Dan occasionally likes things, asking my thoughts on the discontinued Tiffany CT60 annual calendar. Boy, would I like to talk about Tiffany annual calendars, including the T150, but that's another topic for another show. Hold that thought. We're going to return to it. And then we've got Alexei Simola of Finland saying, Heikki Kovalainen is the ultimate lovable loser. Good point. I can see we've got some real F1 fans and connoisseurs in the box. And then Mark S. always asking me to do a best sports watch bracelet show. Okay, I'll do it, Mark. You got it. It's going to happen. I promise this time. I'll just use photos if I don't have inventory. I could see BNS loves that term, lovable loser. And trust me, in F1, there's a whole lot more of those than there are champions. And then right here, the watch fan, what's your opinion about people asking $68,000 for the Longa Odysseus? Look, you can mark up a Royal Oak, you can mark up a Aquanaut or a Nautilus, but I do believe that there is a limit to the markups on the Odysseus. I think it's going to be like markups on the original Deep Sea D Blue back in 2014. There was a surge and then the bottom fell out because ultimately that's not the kind of model that holds out desirability in the Rolex catalog. It's usually something smaller and more core to the collection like a GMT, a Daytona, or a Sub. And second, it's a little bit off the beaten path for a Rolex collector, just as the Odysseus is off the beaten path for a guy who really wants an Aquanaut, a Royal Oak, or a Nautilus. So I do think the bottom's going to fall out of the markup Odysseus market. I give it about a year because Longa is being fairly disciplined with production, but I don't think those markups will stand the test of time. Again, look back to the original Deep Sea D Blue, the surge, and then the implosion, and it'll happen when the market is oversupplied and there are more flippers than there are buyers. Okay, jumping back to our topic, let's look at some of your watches. You've seen mine, Mathieu S. and his Zenith-powered Hublot Spirit of Big Bang. Enjoy a fine bottle of wine. Omid A. and his Rolex Yachtmaster Oysterflex enjoy open spaces in Sedona, Arizona, USA. Randy and his IWC Pilot's Watch UTC scale Mount Lemon in the early fall. Abdul R. and his Rolex Datejust Jubilee frame Constance Lake, a lovely shot. Nicely done. Abdul is our most regular and reliable wrist shot contributor. Okay, talking about cost cutting, the bad news is it's not just brands that have a high designer factor like Panerai and Audemars Piguet. It's also watch nerd brands that have cut corners. We have another infamous episode right here, and I'm sure some of you are going to remember this, but Zenith of LeCoultre, which is one of my favorite brands. Man, I really got to do something about those PNG graphics. But infamously introduced Sellita Power in 2014. Quick background, Zenith, established in 1865, was renowned as the first integrated manufacturer in Switzerland, a reputation it has sustained and promoted to this day. The problem with bringing in Sellita movements is it did it for the obvious reason. And here's an article from the Financial Times, the pink pages, where they're basically saying, yeah, the Sellita SW300 costs a hell of a lot to make than our own Elite, and we want to bring in customers who don't necessarily know what they're looking at and don't really care about movements. If this sounds like a bad tactic for a company that trades on its reputation as a manufacturer, you're absolutely right. The Zenith Elite cost more. The problem is they didn't bring in those new clients. CEO Jean-Frédéric Dufour ascended Stargate style to become a higher being as the Director General of Rolex, and the company was searching for an answer following his departure. But the problem is a huge backlash followed from the customers Zenith already had, and the new customers buying the Sellita-powered Pilot Watch did not show up. So you don't want to lose the bird in the hand to go after the two in the bush, but that's exactly what they did, and they paid the price. The Sellita watch, however, did reach retailers, and while it was ultimately pulled off the market and discontinued, these watches are out there, and I know specifically for Zenith collectors, there are very little interest. If you just want a Pilot watch, that looks cool and runs reliably, you're not going to object to buying one of these since they're generally lower priced on the market. But I know a lot of you want the Zenith Elite and you want to know what you're looking at because these are solid case-back watches. What do you need to look for to make sure you're getting an elite caliber and not a Sellita caliber? If you want to know what the famous Pilot's Watch Extra Special looks like, the infamous Pilot's Watch Extra Special right there has caliber 3000 in the reference number. So you can't tell from the way the watch looks. Flip it over, there's a reference on the case back, and if it says 3000 in the middle of the reference number, that's the Sellita movement. Again, still a decent watch, looks cool, fun to wear, reliable and rugged and all, but if you want a Zenith through and through, you're probably going to proceed to one of the elite calibers that came before and after. Okay, another case in the early 2000s, we all love the Chronomaster line, and I've often called out the Chronomaster 40 millimeters triple calendar moon phase chronometer as the perfect watch. The problem is the COSC certifications end in roughly 2002, and newer Chronomasters, though still well made and still appealing, they look similar but they're not COSC certified. If it doesn't say Chronomet on the dial or the case back, if there's not a number, a serial number on the rotor, you're not looking at a chronometer Zenith, and that's just how it is. Good watches, but if you want the COSC, look for the mark of distinction. I didn't like this. It rubbed me the wrong way. And in general, the mid to late 2000s were a really rough time for Zenith, so there should be no surprises. Okay, jumping into the box right here, Jabo Surf saying the date kills that Zenith. Enrique C saying 6K with a Sellita movement. Wow, yeah, I wouldn't pay that either. We've also got Luis A joining. Saludos Tim from Mexico. Luis, thank you for joining me from south of the border. And who else is in here right now? Amit Gupta saying Aston Martin have their own F1 team next year. Who will be their watch sponsor? All I want to know is who's going to be their sponsor, because Aston Martin, maybe second to McLaren, is in dire straits financially. And I realize that Lawrence Stroll Canadian money just joined them from our own Great White North. But still, running a car company in the red can turn a large fortune into a small fortune, giving rise to the phrase, you can make a small fortune in auto manufacture. The problem right there with Aston Martin is they need money, not a watch partner at this point, though given their Tag Heuer links, I would suspect that continues. All right, here, we have Amit Gupta saying Aston Martin sponsor Red Bull and the team watch is Tag Heuer. That's correct. You filled in the blank for me. I appreciate that. You're also saying, haha, wonderful Coulthard has sent Mike a birthday text to respect the McLaren days. I'm not sure what that refers to, but I wish he were in our chat box. That would be fun. Okay, and we've got a Alexi Simola note. Let's have a toast for Mika Hakkinen, the original flying Finn in F1. I watched his last victory at the Indianapolis Grand Prix. I don't remember if it was 2000 or 2001, but I remember it was his last win, and it was at Indy, and it was a very popular victory. I also understand that while he's often considered to be a quiet guy, he's a lot chattier in his native language, and he now calls Autosport on TV. I would love to watch one of those broadcasts. Okay, watch nerd brands not keeping the faith. Here's another one, Jaeger LeCoultre. First, and we're going way back in time now. Man, those PNG graphics are really killing me. I'm sorry, guys. That says Jaeger LeCoultre. But first came an attempt to move down market back in the early 1970s, and these were known as the Jaeger LeCoultre Club watches. When you see club on the dial, it's right up front, you're getting a Schild movement. It's not a JLC caliber, it's not a LeCoultre caliber, and the idea was to sell these very cheaply and go down below their usual market price point, which was mid-market. JLC in the 60s and 70s was a mid-market watch. The Memovox was haute de gamme. They did very few truly high horology pieces like the 1958 Geophysic. So the club was even below their usual price point, under $100 US. The result is that these are fun and cheap vintage watches to buy, but they're not purebred Jaeger LeCoultre timepieces. They're part of its history, but only in part. They're imperfectly JLC. I will also mention that if you want an automotive analogy, since that's how we opened the episode, a Club Series Jaeger LeCoultre is a lot like this car that I know some of you are going to remember. It had two names,
Properly, it was called the Lista Doran Special, financed by Lista Cabinets and Lista Shelves impresario Freddie Lienhard of Switzerland, driven by Mauro Baldi and Didier Taze, but no one called that car the Lista Doran Special. That car was known as the Fudd. In its previous life as a Ferrari, it was a Michelotto constructed chassis with a Ferrari F1 derived V12, the same V12 that went in the F50. But if we could go back one picture right there, Andrew, the Fudd used a British developed Judd V10, which had its own F1 roots. But no Ferrari purist would ever declare that this mongrel should have its racing wins, and it did win, added to Ferrari's all-time historical tally, because if it doesn't have a Ferrari engine, it's not a Ferrari. The Fudd is good, but not good enough to belong in the Pantheon, no matter how many poles, fast laps, or races the Tony Southgate designed chassis succeeded in winning with the Judd. Now, jumping to another unfortunate degradation, one that's near and dear to my heart because I owned the model. I owned the original model without compromise, but the Jaeger LeCoultre Duomet, a series that started in 2007 with no compromise on material, movement finishing, better than any JLC priced under $100,000 and comparable to those priced over. It had a full deployant clasp. It had a strap that looked and felt better than the straps on general JLC watches. It was above category in every way. That's in 2007, and mine was made in 2010, the white gold chronograph. But newer models started to disappoint even when they featured haute de gamme refinements, such as an enamel dial Grand Faux made in-house. That watch, launched in 2014 in 200-piece, used a pin buckle, and pin buckles started replacing the deployant clasps across the line. That was a transparent way to shave about $1,000 to $2,000 from the retail price. And frankly, it offends my sensibilities. A flagship watch with a dive watch accessory. That doesn't belong on an haute de gamme dress watch that's cost, well, $35,000, $40,000, $45,000, $50,000 at various points. That watch should have a full deployant clasp. I didn't like the cost cutting. I would also mention that finally, and most recently, JLC started swapping its long-standing gold rotors, which were generally 22 karat, in favor of tungsten. And while absolutely the density, the mass, the winding efficiency is similar, these are luxury watches. They deserve to be luxurious inside and out, front and back. And a tungsten rotor on a JLC seems badly out of place, both because it's ugly and obvious cost cutting, and because it's something that we generally associate with mass market brands at a lower price point, or brands that are less about the movement, like Hublot, where it's no offense, it's just the cost of doing business. So this was made more egregious, I should also add, by, and I'm actually going to bring in a few other graphics, but I've got the caliber 975 auto tractor from the 1990s, just so you can see an example of what I'm talking about. That's a 22 karat gold mass, not 21, not 18, not tungsten. And right up through about 2015, 2016, 2017, JLC was still using those gold masses. The problem, and I think the turning point, was 2018's Polaris collection, because with the Polaris series, JLC embraced tungsten rotors at price points where, frankly, they just don't belong at a brand that should never have gone there. So, the first use of tungsten on mass market JLC pieces. The problem, again, is that all of these watches used something that was there solely for the purpose of cutting cost, and JLC had the bad taste to put the first ever display case back on its caliber 750 chronograph. The caliber 750 chronograph was not designed for a display case back, had only ever been seen on display case backs in Cartier watches costing thousands less, and once finally displayed was frankly ugly, compounding a movement never designed to be seen with a rotor that shouldn't have been seen and frankly shouldn't have been there in the first place. Again, offensive on both levels. That was something that JLC messed up, and hopefully they're heading in a better direction today. That was just after the arrival of their new CEO. I'm hoping that they're on an upward trajectory after the last 2 years' impressive debuts of high complications, getting back to where they should be. And where you should be is watches your watches on this box. Viewer wrist shots 4. Dave C. of Hertford, UK shares his and hers Rolex shot with the Yachtmaster 42 and Submariner, which appears to be the new Submariner. George B. of the UK is there with his Blancpain 50 Fathoms Ocean Commitment 3 and Igor the Weimaraner. Adam C. of our Tim Masso Facebook group, please join me on Facebook, just took delivery of his Oris Big Crown Pointer Roberto Clemente limited edition, and Moritz V. of Frankfurt takes us home with his incredible de Bethune DB10 reissue with caliber 2024. Guys, send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com. You know we'd get there. High horology is not exempt from the practice of cost cutting. And with Patek Philippe, you already know those logos. You already know where we're going. The Nautilus bracelet. Why? As far as I can tell, this happened for the 2012 model year, but pin sleeves, a primitive and utilitarian system of fixing removable links to a bracelet, but pin sleeve links replaced the old screwed links. So screw-fixed links, which Patek had used forever, get replaced by pin sleeves. Why? I don't know. This is Omega Tech from the 1990s. This is Tag Heuer tech. Heck, even old Tag Heuer watches don't use pin sleeves bracelets. Across the Patek catalog, it doesn't matter the price point. A grand complication on a gold or platinum bracelet, they're using the pin sleeves now. I don't know why. I don't know what that added to the experience or why this was done, because it's hard to size these at home. All I can say is that, as with the AP Jumbo, the market doesn't seem to care. The Nautilus before and after 2012 still sells at multiples of its original retail price. So from a used standpoint, again, the market doesn't seem to care, but this is an instance where the designer factor is so high, half the market for that kind of watch couldn't care less whether it were sleeves or screws. I will say that Patek has invested in the Nautilus, and they gave it a new movement last year in the 26 330 SC, so I don't know why the bracelet is still a pin sleeve affair, but I can hope that with the next generation Nautilus, they'll have a change of heart. And Vacheron Constantin, a brand I love, a brand that's underrated and has done wonderful things in recent years, but they caught flack, and justifiably so, for the 56 collection of 2018, and the 56 self-winding in particular. This is a watch that at $11,300 features a movement that is neither Geneva hallmark nor made by Vacheron. It's supplied by Valfleurier, and the movement was originally created for the likes of Piaget and Cartier. So that's what the movement was intended for. That caliber 1326 is at its best in the Vacheron. It's never been better finished, and the rotor is hand finished, so you get some richness. The blue dial version of the watch is better still. It looks good. It's made of steel. The price is right. The problem isn't the price. The problem are the incremental extra sales this adds to Vacheron's annual turnover worth submerging the brand at a price point where the likes of Breitling, Omega, and at least half a dozen other Richemont brands, JLC, Panerai, IWC, Piaget, Cartier, even Baume & Mercier are selling watches. Vacheron needs distinction. Richemont has other brands to drive volume at lower price points. This watch wasn't necessary, and with every other 56 model powered by a Vacheron movement with the Geneva hallmark, I felt that this was a degradation of the brand image that was entirely avoidable and unnecessary. I would even say that I believe the $11,300, I believe the $14,600 Quai de Lille steel is as low as Vacheron should go, and it's got everything you want. $14,600. You're getting Vacheron's own movement. You're getting Geneva hallmark, 100-meter water resistance on the newer ones. It's a wearable 41 millimeters. It's loomed. It's a sports watch. It's a dress watch. It's all of those things, and for under 15 grand, you are getting the 5100, the movement that Vacheron designed for its entry-level automatics with a 60-hour power reserve, Geneva hallmark finish. Yeah, there's a tungsten rotor, but the rotor and the rest of the movement is finished by hand. I can't say that of the caliber 1326. That's already disputable. Going any lower, unnecessary, and an avoidable self-owned by Vacheron's product planning team. Guys, if you want to continue the discussion, the after party is on Facebook. Join me on Tim Masso's Talking Time with Tim Masso Facebook group. We will be chatting after the show. I want to shout out to everyone in the box tonight. Thank you for joining me. Thanks for Andrew, the technical hero of the evening, my live studio audience, Josh over there, and all you out in cyberspace. Time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.